Welcome to Decoded, the podcast that decodes the design, technology, and experiences shaping our world and planet. I am Elisa Leñero.
And I'm Saima Ahmed Christensen. Together we explore the systems, behaviors, and technologies influencing how we live, work, and connect, from human interactions to the ecosystems we are part of.
Each episode is a conversation with technologists, designers, entrepreneurs, and everyday users. Join us. Hi, welcome back to the show. I am Melissa.
And I'm Saima.
I'm a designer by training and currently rediscovering what design is in times where the world is challenged in many different ways, from the artificial intelligence revolution to deep societal changes and massive ecosystem destruction.
And I'm a professor of design engineering and innovation and director of DigitLab, exploring design and digital technologies based in the University of Exeter. And in today's episode, we'll be exploring the theme of data, entrepreneurship, and the value of data. So we're pleased to welcome Irene McAleese, co-founder and chief strategy officer at See.Sense, and Philip McAleese, who's the company's CEO and also a co-founder. Welcome, both of you. Philip and Irene are the co-founders of See.Sense, a mobility technology and data company helping cities understand cycling through real-world rider data captured using patented sensor technology. Philip is the company's CEO and leading the technology and product vision behind See.Sense intelligence bike lights and sensor-based mobility insights. And Irene is the chief commercial officer leading strategy, partnerships, and international growth. Together, they've grown See.Sense from a startup idea into an international company working with cities and transport agencies across Europe, Australia, and North America, turning everyday cycle journeying into insights that help design safer, more livable cities. Welcome to the show, both of you, first of all.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It's our pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So if someone picked up your products, your bike lights, and I actually have two of them, as you may know, and use them regularly, it's not really immediately obvious that these are intelligent lights and what these products can do. So they can do a lot more than shine light and illuminate a cyclist or illuminate the journey of the bike for the cyclists. So the two of you came up with this idea. Could you talk us through where this idea came from and your entrepreneurship journey?
Sure. So I guess the idea really started around about 2011, 2012. I was an executive working in Singapore, looking after some client-facing systems. And like many busy executives, I didn't have as much time as I would like to go to the gym and look after my personal health. And so I took up cycling as a way of getting a bit of exercise back into an otherwise busy daily routine. And I found that I really enjoyed it, but I didn't always enjoy the interaction with other road users. And so the long commutes really got me, some time to think about how could we improve this? And I saw that cars all had set-out visible running lights, which had been introduced by European legislation around 2011. And this was shown to reduce collisions by between 5 and 10% for cars. And so I figured, well, if something as big as a car needs it, then I would really benefit from that as a cyclist as well. And so I set out on a quest to get better lighting in order to improve my experience. And I used mountain bike style lights, which were visible in the daytime. And worked really well. The downside, of course, is that they're expensive and they're because they have to be bright to be visible during the day, they require large battery packs. And so they're heavy and you don't want to leave them on the bike because they could be stolen, even in a low crime city like Singapore. You don't really want to take them off to keep with you every time. So it was really quite inconvenient, although very effective. And so I was cycling along one day looking at the smartphone on my handlebars, realized that it had a level of situational awareness. It had smart sensor technology that allowed it to know where I was and what the experience was like around me. And so I thought, what if we took that smart sensor technology and integrated it into the bike light to give it a level of situational awareness? We could then generate something that flashes brighter and faster in response to danger and conserves its energy by flashing more sedately whenever you're not in a higher risk situation. And so there was a very active forum at the global employer where I worked, and I posted on there and said, hey, I've recently taken up cycling, having not cycled since a teenager. You, ladies and gentlemen, are very adept at cycling, and I've been doing it much more than I have. What do you think of this idea? And over the course of a couple of days, I got nearly 100 replies that said, that sounds fantastic. And if you make one, can you make one for me as well? And so that was really the origin of where it started. And then as we started to develop that product, we realized that the sensor insights that we were getting were much more detailed and had a lot more interesting information in them than we'd ever expected. We developed very early on a very smart algorithm that's really our trade secret that allows us to do some really clever things with the data. And we realized that it was much more about not just one person's journey, but if we can aggregate that up against a lot of journeys and a lot of cyclists, we can get a really holistic picture around not only how people are moving around the city and where, but actually what their experiences is. Where are the junctions that are working well and where are the ones that are more challenging? And so that began, I guess, a second quest or a second wave of innovation to really bring that together and see how can we help our cities to make them more livable and more enjoyable for all of its citizens.
But if I can just add as well, I think, Seema, to your point, yeah, it looks like a regular bike light because fundamentally it is. Um, Yeah, I think we come at it from the point of view of this also has to be a really good piece of kit that a cyclist would want to put on their bike and actually use as a high quality bike light. So there's no point having, tech for the sake of tech, that it does all this really fancy stuff for cities and collecting data if at its base level it doesn't fulfill the job that a cyclist needs to do, which is be a good safety, addition to the bike that they will then want to use and put it on their bike. So yeah, it does work as a bike light, and actually it's a really great bike light that we're super proud of because it does use the sensors to react to the cyclist environment. It's going to flash brighter and faster at riskier moments. It's going to conserve its battery power at other times. So cyclists are like, yeah, it's a bright light. It has a really long run time. It's lightweight. Um, and that's why I want to put it on my bike, as well as the connected features, not just because of the benefit to the city with the data. So yeah, you can pick it up and go, looks like a bike light. It is, but it's much more.
Right. And can I ask a couple of questions? One of them is, what's your background, both of you? And then the second question is, I haven't seen them, for example. Like I've seen them because of the research that we do at the podcast, but I don't have them. So I would love to, if you can just explain to us, when you talk about the lighting, is that the light, of course, for the other people that are seeing the cyclist? So you are protecting the cyclist. But what is the kind of, what other things are you showing to the cyclist that is using your light?
So there's a couple of questions in there, but I think, yeah, firstly, the background for Philip and I. So my background is actually behavioral science, and I worked. So I have a good understanding of psychology, but also then I worked in change management for large organizations, management consulting. So my last real job before I started this was a management consultant for Accenture, based in London. Um, but and this sounds really different to startup life because it's large companies and systems thinking and lots of stakeholders. But as things have turned out, those skill sets have actually been quite transferable in terms of the work we're doing, as we'll probably touch on later, does largely involve working with a wide range of stakeholders in very complex systems that are trying to do change, that are trying to implement change in their cities, fundamentally changing how the modal shift works. So lots of those skills have been really applicable. in those stages and in the early stages more on the marketing aspects in terms of understanding customer needs and trying to align messaging to that. Philip?
Yeah, my background, I did a degree in electronic and software engineering at Queen's University in Belfast. My first job was then integrating radar systems into air traffic control simulators for the National Air Traffic Services in the UK. And then I moved into investment banking, IT, to look after majority trading systems. In terms of you'd asked about the light as well, so I just happen to have one here. This is a slightly older generation model. We've been through a number of generations. And really, as Irene says, it's a small compact device. And it's really the flashing pattern and the variation of it that allows it to be really clever. So you can see it's flashing relatively sedately there. If I move it around a little bit, you'll see that obviously that would be quite an extreme movement on a bike. So you can see that it flashes now much brighter and faster in order to draw more attention to itself. And then as I stop moving it, you can see it's starting to return back to a level of normality. There's a lot of engineering goes into it, and a lot of what it reacts to is very complex. And even the fact that it has, 3 distinct brightness flash patterns that are quite visually different from one another. It's often the change in the flashing that draws people's attention to it more than the flashing itself. It's a little bit like a ticking clock in a room. You'll hear it initially, and then it fades from your sort of auditory senses very quickly. And it only becomes noticeable again if it changes or something different happens. So it's that change that helps it to be super visible.
Right.
Can we go back to your entrepreneurship journey? So we understood where you got your idea, and that was quite brilliant because you actually got user feedback before you even started, right? Through your 100 people or so that answered. So how did you go from there? Did you just quit your day jobs?
And be like, let's do
this. Like, how did that go from there to
I have to tell you, a lot of people thought we were quite crazy, Seema, because we have a pretty comfortable lifestyle in Singapore at the time. We both gave up successful corporate careers to start See.Sense. And we moved from Singapore back to Northern Ireland, where Philip is from, partly because we had at that time 2 very young children. So my 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so I kind of thought, I don't know how I'm going to re-enter back into being a management consultant with the kind of life that I was doing in London with 2 young kids. It seemed like a good time to make a transition into something else. And we thought, you know what, let's just try this idea and we'll give it a couple of years. And if it hasn't worked, then what's the worst that can happen? That we've spent a bit of time at home, with closer to Phil's family, with the children while they were young. And that was the kind of rationale, I think, that we had for taking such a big risk. And we thought we would be able to get back to our old jobs if we needed to relatively easily. So that was the rationale for doing it. When we went to Northern Ireland, we decided to launch the product on a crowdfunding website called Kickstarter.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those.
So Kickstarter was actually a great way to test the water and validate the user demand for this kind of product. And we were really surprised and elated that within 8 days, I think we met our funding goal. And we had tremendous feedback from the cycling community who were really seeing the value of this product, which at the time was nothing to do with the data. It was all about the bike light reacting to its environment and being an intelligent bike light. After we met the funding goal and we developed the product, which, by the way, was a huge learning curve for us because Philip knew about the electronics, but in terms of how do we put the casing around the product, how do we market this, the packaging, everything was a huge learning curve, but we were able to partner with universities and access other funding grants and things like this in Northern Ireland at that time that helped us do little to educate ourselves along the way. But very much that feedback from those first customers was important, not only to validate the demand, but also because they gave us ideas and assistance. Because the wonderful thing about Kickstarter was that we had a gap between the prototype and the delivery of the product. And that gap actually allowed us to take that initial enthusiasm and interest from the customers, treat them as a focus group, and actually say, what would you like to see in the light? How should we? There was some fundamental stuff that was already developed in the prototype, but there was space to make some tweaks and adjustments to various aspects of how the light would react, or flash patterns, or different things like this that we could incorporate before we delivered that first final product.
Right.
And then once we were able to deliver that first final product, it was great because we were then able to talk to retailers and say, hey, we actually sold, £30,000 or £40,000 worth of these lights in 1 month on Kickstarter from our garage. So what could you do if you, with your marketing might behind you with this product? And so we were really fortunate that Chain Reaction Cycles, which at the time was the largest online retailer in the world, happened to be based in Northern Ireland, heard about the product and immediately stocked our lights.
Oh,
And
that's great.
yeah, like a lot of products don't, they cross that sort of chasm from, that initial product, but we immediately started selling those lights, and over a couple of years, the momentum grew. We actually became British Cycling's preferred bike light supplier, and also Cycling Ireland's preferred bike light supplier. But ultimately, we knew that the company, to grow and sustain, would need to be more than just a single product of a bike light.
Yeah.
And this is where we took on investment from a venture capital firm that helped us then take on the next phase of our vision, which was about then accessing all of the data that could come from those lights and really having a way that we could assist cities through better understanding of the cyclist movements, and therefore be able to monetize that data stream that could come from the lights. That allowed us to get investment.
Can I ask you? You mentioned that you're a behavioral scientist, and Philip, you are in like all deep in electronics. But basically, the process that you are telling us is quite design-centric approach. Like it's about like how you're moving from the product, the idea that you moved, like that you had, all the way to kind of developing the product. Can you tell us like where this kind of sense of design process came from, both like from your experiences, from, I don't know if you read about it, like, yeah, can you tell us more like where that kind of design process was embedded?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a story that I don't tend to share very often because it's kind of it's definitely a near miss story in terms of it nearly didn't
Well,
happen.
I'm glad that you're sharing
Um,
it in the podcast. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get it out there to the people. So I was the stereotypical engineer designing for myself, a darkened room and pizza slid under the door to keep me alive. And I was really enjoying myself in terms of, researching specifications, matching LED wavelength colors to the precise receptors in your eyes so that you would get the maximum efficiency. I spoke with a professor at Oxford to really dial in the visibility element of it. And I came up with a device that, even to this day, I don't think has been surpassed in terms of its ability to keep you visible on the road. And it was a hexagonal device about this big. So I guess about 10 centimeters across there or thereabouts. And I was essentially ready to go forward with this device. It was, you know, technically brilliant, and I still think it is today. And Irene encouraged me to go and talk to some cyclists, and I sort of almost scoffed at her and said, what do I need to talk to cyclists for? I'm an engineer. This is the best thing since sliced bread in my younger arrogance. And fortunately, I took her advice and met up with a local, the Northbound Cycling Club, who were very active at cycle club in our area at one of their coffee stops. And I explained what it was, showed them the prototype, and there was lots of I guess you call it prairie dogging from the other tables, where everyone was like, "Oh, what's that?" and craning their necks to see what this new bright light was. And so, to me, it was in the bag. I thought we've designed this; it's amazing. Everyone's showing interest, and almost as a throwaway question right at the end, I said, "Would you buy one?" And there was just silence, a couple of intakes of breath, and it wasn't the reaction I was expecting, and I was really very surprised. And so I thought, well, let's unpack that a bit. Why is it you're not giving me an immediate yes? And they said, well, it's a little bit too big. And I was looking at cycling as a technical sport because as an engineer coming towards it, it's all about the carbon fiber bike and 10 grams lighter than last year and 5% stiffer and all of these technical things. And so I assumed that they would want something that was technically brilliant. But no, it's not that at all. It's very much a fashion industry. And when you've got the sleek lines of your Italian carbon fiber bike, the last thing you want to do is put some giant big light on the back of it, no matter how effective it is at keeping you safe. So I learned a very important lesson there, which was not to design for myself, but to design for the customer and to involve the customer early on. So we sort of accidentally really came across design-based thinking. We were clued into it very quickly after that. And we used, a local company called Big Small Design, and Stephen McGilloway there was incredibly helpful as a professional designer, making sure that we were always thinking about our customer and putting our customer first. And it's very much an ethos that we've carried through, which has allowed us to be as successful as we have been.
That's
And
fantastic.
I think probably my change management background had some different perspective with that, because usually if you want change to stick, you need to consult with the stakeholders that it is going to impact. So that's always a kind of mantra through change management. So I guess there's a parallel a little bit there. So that might have been why I said, go and talk to a cyclist and see what they think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, you started with the lights and the sensor, and then your vision evolved over time, as you mentioned, to also think about data. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about that. So you've got this smart, intelligent lights, and you've also, I happen to know, have GPS trackers and other devices that collect data from stakeholders. Could you describe what led you to that vision and why that data is relevant? And what is your process of understanding the value around it?
Yeah. So the vision really is that, I guess, when we understood that there's a whole lot of information, as Philip said, that is being gathered in order for the light to be able to react to its environment. But at the first product, that information was lost. It was just used for the use case of a light reacting. And we realized that there was so much granularity in this data that we could see where a cyclist was swerving, where a cyclist was braking, even the road surface condition that they're traveling over. Was it rough or was it smooth? And we thought, this is a lot of very valuable information, not so much from a single cyclist, but if we can aggregate that data up, you could start to look for patterns and you could see where are those hotspots where lots of people are swerving, lots of people are braking. And actually, wouldn't this information be useful for a city? Because we came at this from a vision of wanting to help improve safety for cyclists. Having a bike light is one way to do that, but actually the bigger picture of things, if you can improve the infrastructure that cyclists travel on, that in a way that actually can have a bigger effect and improve. So we wanted to move up the ladder, so to speak, from the personal protective equipment to the actual system that we could influence that would make the cyclist better. So that was the vision of how could we aggregate up data and form a network a mobile sensor network of cyclists across the city. So lots of people said to us, you'll never be able to do that. You'll never have enough cyclists out there that will be able to gather the data. So it was chicken and egg a little bit at the start because we wanted to have lots of data, but until we had lots of data, nobody could believe that that these aggregated data insights would be valuable.
Yeah.
And this is where we then went on a journey to work with cities. And we have to thank Dublin City Council as one of the very first councils that we worked with, and also Manchester City Council, another early adopter who let us trial and gave us funding to trial a mass number of cyclists who would get one of these bike lights. And that enabled us to look at three things. Firstly, how would cyclists feel about collecting data and sharing data? This was just before GDPR came in 2018. The second thing was, how would we just, from a technological point of view, handle the sheer volume of data that we would gather from hundreds of riders in these cities? So we are collecting data 800 times a second. We're using edge processing and AI on the device to crunch and analyze all that data in real time, but it's still a lot of data that's coming into the cloud. So just the architecture of how do we handle that? And then the last thing, and the very important thing, was how do we deal with cities? How would they use these data insights? And that was really important because at the end of the day, we are not transport planners. We are experts in our technology and in gathering the data, but ultimately we are not the person that would be making a decision from this data. And that is one of the most important things that our early pilots taught us, was what use cases would the cities have for this data, and how can we frame and articulate our offering in a way that is dialed into that need. So that was where we really, that was a really pivotal point for our company, really, as we have transitioned to being more and more of a data company. It is now less about the B2C consumer side of selling a bike light. And now much more what we do is working directly with cities to deploy these devices, building on what we learned from those early trials, where cities will say, actually, this data is so valuable now. It's filling gaps in data that we don't have. We don't know the experience of the cyclist. We don't know where the safety issues are. We're not able to be proactive and take data to identify those hotspots and put things in place, monitor and evaluate the impact of that, have a baseline to compare to. So all of that is missing for cycling data. And that's where cities see the value, and that's exactly the piece where we're dialed into.
Right. And can I ask, first of all, can you tell us which cities are using this data and leveraging this data? And then also you talk about, you walk us very beautifully through the kind of process on how you went from process or developing to then launching the product. And then also how you understood the value, or the value that the data was giving you. But what is a process that you use to understand that value? It's not, I wouldn't say that is easy to understand that process, and also to understand what is a value behind that data. As you said, you were crunching 800 hours, you said, per 800?
Yeah, we take 800 readings per second.
800 readings per second. So imagine all the data that you were crunching. So what was the process to understand that value?
Yeah. So, well,
And
we've
the
been doing
cities
this.
as well.
It's really hard. It's really hard work, and I have to say that. And it's one of the challenges is that different cities have different levels of capability as well in using data and handling it. So the first cities we worked with, we were focused on the three things of how will cyclists feel about collecting data. Actually, they were really happy about doing it, and they were, especially if the data could be used to solve an issue such as potholes or improve safety, then they're very happy for aggregate data to be shared. We worked out the architecture for handling all the data. In terms of the cities, it's been a learning curve. The very first project, we handed them very proudly a data file and said, here you go. Here's this hard-won data that's taken all of our patented sensor technology to develop. We got cyclists involved. We gathered it all. We stored it. We've produced it into this lovely Excel or, data file for you, handed it over the fence. And the city went, oh, how do I use that?
Of course, yeah.
Because, really you think this is 2017, 2018. Smart cities was really just a new thing. How and using data for decision making in local councils is quite a big leap from where some local councils were that are really just using at the moment, were back then very basic data if they had any of like a cyclist count, a loop in the road, counting the number of cyclists in some locations. If they had that data, there's no existing data about safety unless it's a death or a serious injury that's recorded at the scene by the police. Again, reactive and historical data. So the capability of the local councils to take a data file and then interpret that, visualize it, interpret it, make meaning from it, and then get to a decision, we realized, oh, here's another gap. So it's not just the data that's missing, it's then the ability to use that data. And
Has that
so,
changed, Irene, over, you mentioned that was in 2016, 2017. I can imagine even today, if you handed a big file of data over, that people would be like, what am I supposed to do with this? And maybe it's not aligned to their day jobs. So it's
that's
also
right.
about having the time and resources. So how do you
Exactly.
overcome that problem? How do you overcome creating something that's valuable for your stakeholders?
Yeah, some local authorities do. Transport for London, for example, we worked with them. They have an amazing data science team in-house, and they're very capable of taking that data file, bringing it into their tools. Engineering consultants can do that. But yeah, your average local authority, busy, overworked, and even if they did have the capability, just may not have the time. And this made us realize if we want to see our data used for the intent that we saw that there was value, we would need to make it more accessible, more usable. And that led us to down the path of needing to create data dashboards for decision making. So our first data dashboards were quite basic. Data was visualized. You could see the popular routes. You could then add on layers to see areas of swerving or braking, for example, which was good, which was a step change. But a real next step forward has actually been the further consultation that we've done. And I'm happy to say I've been able to work with you on this, Seema, through the Digit Lab consultation process. But we got a whole lot of different stakeholders in the room from different local authorities and councils and said, how would you use this data? And what would you need to have in the data dashboard that could help you solve an issue that you genuinely have? So Phil has been really closely working with lots of different local authorities on this as well, but we've done this process now in London. We've also done this in Dublin, and we now have another project underway in Australia. And all of these are helping our data dashboards become more and more sophisticated, now using AI and machine learning in the data itself to give more context to the data that See.Sense collects, and therefore enhance the meaningfulness of the data and the helping them get to the decision more quickly. What do I need to do? Where are the hotspots? Where are things changing? How can I monitor the impact before and after a piece of infrastructure has gone in? Which routes are popular and why are they popular? Give me information about, the See.Sense data, but also where are the roadworks happening? What's the impact of the weather? What about comments that are online that cyclists are talking about, or commentary that they have had from that they've used in the See.Sense app? All this has richness and insight. So that's the journey we are on at the moment. And it's been a great process that you introduced us to as well, seeing through DigitLab, that we're now building on as well going forward.
Yeah, we should just say that so DigitLab is one of the research centers, and we did a partnership with See.Sense where we worked with a number of workshops. I think we ran 4 or 5 in total, haven't we? Something like that, with around different challenges. So one was around the infrastructure and maintenance of roads that you've talked about. But we've others that we haven't really touched on. But now I know your background, Irene. For the first time, I understand where we landed there, which was about encouraging behavior change. So encouraging people to bike. So whether it's children and parents helping the children to encourage bike, or improving mental health and physical health. Do you want to say a little bit about how you ended up in that direction? Because that's quite different from safety, and where you really sort of start with the, if you sort of, in design terms, we talk about functionality, so a function of a bike light. And now we've changed that function into many different things. So it's quite fascinating, and it's the data that's enabling that. But the product is now very, very different from the starting point.
Yeah. So behavior change is really fascinating, because cities are wanting to help more people make that modal shift, particularly for short journeys. Now, not everybody is going to start riding a bike to do everything, but there are short journeys, and I think the statistic is something like 30% of all journeys in the UK are under 1 kilometre. So even
under 1 kilometre,
under 1 kilometre.
Yeah, I guess that's to do with all the sharing bikes.
And those journeys are taken by car. 30% are taken by car or under 1 kilometre. And so there's a huge opportunity that we could, if we can help some people, of those 30% of journeys that are taken by car, if we can just under 1 kilometre, if we can even just get people to walk or cycle for those journeys, that can really move the needle in cities for reducing congestion, reducing pollution, and the impact on health. So that's the sweet spot that cities really want to target. For behaviour change, we know that why do people not cycle those distances? What is the barrier? Well, the number one barrier is actually safety, or the perception of safety, particularly with women. But there are other factors as well. And we have been very pleased to work on a number of different projects. And one that comes to mind that we're very proud of is in Essex. Essex identified that one of the barriers is that people just don't own a bike. And particularly in deprived areas in Essex, people that are living where there's no good public transport even near them. They're not close to a train. The way that places have been designed, it's not easy for them to get to a train or a bus without having to drive a car. And if they don't have a car, it can limit their ability to access work, education, and other things, and create this kind of spiral. So the idea was that they got funding to provide free bikes to people living in these areas so that they could then use the bike to access this. Now, firstly, as a local authority, it's a great idea, but they need data and evidence to show hey, if we're going to give out free bikes, we've got to show that this project is having an impact.
Mhm.
Are the bikes being used?
Yep.
And where do people ride them? And how often do they ride them? And what could be the barriers that are stopping them riding them from the infrastructure point of view? So, again, really hard to get this data because, well, okay, you could say, well, just give everybody an app and they'll record everything in an app. This area, no, people, they may not have a phone.
Mhm.
They may not, if they have a phone, they may not charge the phone or be able to afford to charge the phone. They may have technological challenges with using an app and connecting it to a bike light or something else to be able to send this data. They wanted a solution that meant there was no friction required for the user at all. So they could simply hop on the bike and ride, and they would have 100% of the data coming to the cloud with no friction for the user. And that is what we were able to provide from See.Sense. And I'm really proud that we were able to do this because the first bikes we had to do using a dynamo solution to charge the GPS tracker, which is actually not trivial from a technology point of view. But what it meant was that we could gather this data off a non-e-bike because the challenge with GPS trackers is that they're very power hungry. So they're
Mm-hmm.
fine on
Yeah.
an if you've got an e-bike, you can connect it into the e-bike power source. But if you don't have an e-bike, how do you get that data?
Yeah.
Not possible. There was no other solution on the market that could do that for them. And we actually worked with them because our device is quite low powered. And it's not just the data we're gathering, but it's how we send the data over a low power wide area network, which again was a huge innovation in itself. We won the Digital Catapult award for a platinum award for innovation on that front. And we were one of the first companies in the UK to use the low power wide area network for this use case.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, the project went from 100 bikes is now 3,000 bikes collecting data. And the data has been absolutely instrumental in them being able to show that this program is working and people are, how often they're riding. Importantly, where they're riding. It showed that they're
Yeah.
riding to the train station. It showed that they're riding to the shops. And it showed where they could build infrastructure. They actually built a bike path along one of the routes. They used the data to monitor before and after, and they could even break that down and look at are there more females using this route than males and this kind of thing. So the data has helped them expand that project. And it has gone on to be not just in Essex. Southall also adopted a project, and there's one in Birmingham as well. So that's just an example.
Mhm.
Our data is
And
also used in some like GP referral schemes that they
Mhm.
have where they're
Right.
trying to get people onto bikes. They can track and monitor usage essentially.
That's more from the side of the people, the output, right? Like people using that data or using the data that you guys are collecting. But what about motivating the users to share the data? Where can
Ah,
you briefly explain us where, like, also this angle of, as you said, perhaps before we had GDPR, it was more simpler than now. So
yeah.
how are you motivating users to share that data? And I'm imagining now from what you were saying that there's no app in your system. Like it's come directly from the device that you showed, right? From the See.Sense, basically.
Yeah, I can cover a little bit on that. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. You'd imagine that pre GDPR would have been easier times because there was the Data Privacy Act, but it was lesser known. We actually found the reverse to be true. We found the GDPR was a really good process because it put in place, I guess, standardized terms and ways of looking at data. The people that were
Oh,
interested in
right.
understanding how their own data was used, it gave them a framework,
Hmm.
which was very easy for us to then work with. It really helped to standardize and solidify the language and process around data and how it's used. And so we found it to be actually of great benefit to us in our journey. In terms of motivating the individual cyclist, a lot of products that you see out there, the use of the data and the original way it's collected are often at odds with one another. So, a search engine is the perfect example where, you want to go and search for something. And obviously because you're not paying anything for it, for that search, you are effectively the product. So, your data is sold to allow advertisers um, pitch to you to sell their products. So you may or may not want that advertising. Um, and so that's kind of an example where they're kind of a little bit at odds. Whereas for the cyclist, what the only thing we're doing with the data is to try and improve the environment and the infrastructure to help them have a better cycling experience. And because of that alignment, we find that there's a really good opt-in rate. It's very high. And once people are opted in, they continue to collect data for us. They're interested in seeing the outputs and how it's changing the world and the environment around them to benefit both themselves and other cyclists and indeed other road users in general.
That's quite interesting because we've talked about 2 or 3 different examples or usage of your data. And if you think about the one of the improving the roads and the infrastructure or the safety, I guess from a individual cyclist point of view, that's a benefit for the greater good of other cyclists and perhaps yourself. When it's the example of encouraging you, the one you said in Southall and Essex, encouraging people to cycle, obviously there's the greater good in terms of the environment, but there's also a benefit to the individual, which is the physical benefit of cycling. So that's a different example. So it's an individual benefit rather than a benefit to everybody. Do you find differences in uptake, or can you see that and how many people are actually sharing your data across those different examples?
Um, I guess it's a little bit biased in terms of that data because the people that buy the bike light and connect into bike light programs
Yeah.
have either bought it as it's a relatively expensive product because it has a lot of features. So people do give it a lot of consideration before they buy it. And I think
Right.
by the time
Yeah.
they've come to that realization, they're probably already bought into the data collection journey.
Mhm.
The alternative is that they receive it as a subsidized product as part of a project with the local authority. In which case, again, they've expressed interest in helping that local authority to improve cycling and cycling conditions. And then the third way we get data is from the autonomous devices, so from the Summit 2 GPS tracker that's used in Essex and other places. Those are fitted to the bikes, and they simply transmit when the bike moves. So there's no involvement with the user other than
Mhm.
agreeing to have their data insights collected at the start of when they agree to get a bike.
Mm. But Seema, they have used the data as a feedback loop to participants. So, for example, on some of those bike libraries, they have actually paired them with a coach.
Yeah.
So the coach has said, actually, Seema, you've only ridden your bike once this week, and I could see that in the previous weeks you'd ridden it 3 times. Is there some kind of, is there some issue going on? Do you need some help or something like this? So they've been able to pair that as insight for a coach to take and having those discussions. So a couple of projects have used that. On our most recent project, there is actually an app back that the user can see their stats on the app as well. So some people find that quite motivating, and they can just see number of miles that they've travelled and that kind of thing through there. There's also the ability to text or message participants back from the city individually, so they can say, um, you know, anything that the city wants to share back, that we can tailor that back. So it's through a platform. So there might be nudging, essentially,
Mhm.
more cycling based on a pattern, that they would want to reinforce or provide assistance with. Um, and they can also use our app to on the lights to make reports to report close passes, to report potholes, to report issues or make requests. And those insights are all visible on our website. So people can go in and see what the community is talking about. And cities on our projects often come back to participants through a newsletter, through email as well. And we'll say, this is what the group are telling us. Here's the popular days of the week, or here are some of the popular routes, and just give people some insight as to what the community are experiencing, while they can see their individual stats on the app.
No, that's brilliant. I think it's probably a really good time. We've had a very good conversation to sort of draw this to a close. And thinking through my takeaways, what I hear from you. One, that you took the leap in faith from your own experience, really, for biking, and took a big leap of faith from a huge risk from leaving corporate jobs to starting this program, and that fit around personal lifestyle and choices of your work and life balance. But then the product has really evolved. So as well as being a smart light in the beginning, it's evolved with time. So data has become more available. There's been a huge focus on Internet of Things and the availability of data and insights. And the product's evolved with those insights. And the examples that you've shown us are across safety, but also across behavioral change. I think you've overcome that data sharing problem, as you say, by having to buy into the product before you start sharing your data. So you've sort of already almost, you've already accepted that part of the journey. Is there a single takeaway that either of you would like to add?
I would say that really our strength has been this kind of co-creation approach that has run through everything that we have done, from the initial development of the hardware and the product, the physical product, talking with cyclists. What do they want in a bike light? What do they need? How does it need to work for you? Right through to the many trials and projects and pilots that we have done with cities, looking at how we use the data. And if we hadn't taken that co-creation approach, I don't think we would be here as a company today, because our solution would not be as strong as it is now. So that has to come into the DNA of the company. And we talk about values at See.Sense, and innovation is one of our core values. And we always say to our team that just because Philip had a great idea 10 years ago with the bike light, we cannot rest on our laurels. We have to continually innovate. And this means that we bring that innovation into everything that we do. It's not just the product. How do we, how do we do our marketing? How do we think about, the data dashboard and the use cases? Everything is evolving, and we continue that innovation process.
Yeah, that's a very great point, because actually you had your touch points of co-creation from the very, very, very beginning, all the way from the idea and your feedback that you got the community to the investment Kickstarter, and then throughout in there. So thank you very much, Philip and Irene, for joining us today. We've really enjoyed the show. And we're excited that in our next episode, we bring Dr. Pat Langdon, who's a professor and a psychologist working in design and inclusive design. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Let us know what you think, or if you have an idea for a future guest or topic, at www.decodedpodcast.com.
Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you listen, and follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Decoded Thought Podcast. See you!